It's Friday, the 25th of May, 2018. You're listening to Amusing Ourselves to Death. Hi, Cam, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
Not bad. Today we're going to be talking about Italy, Kate Maltby, David Gawker, our Justice Minister, the Shell AGM, bean counters, aka the Big Four, a new project on property developers and local councils that's been started by Tamsin Cave of Spinwatch, maybe a little bit about the trade war, AGMs, and the dismantling of the United States of America.
Just pop that at the end there.
Yeah, I mean, we'll chuck in a few other little bits on the way. So, Kate Maltby, did you notice this one at the time? Because I don't think it got that much coverage. I went mad on it yesterday, but...
Do you know, I didn't, not until the stories that have been reported since she won a bit of a settlement.
Oh, well, that's what I meant. I mean, even yesterday, did you notice the settlement being reported much?
Not as much as I would probably expect it to be, given it's quite a vicious story in terms of what happened to her.
I didn't automatically see it on my Twitter feed, and I didn't... Yeah, I mean, I only saw it because in The Guardian, in their paper, they'd said that she was... So Kate Maltby is a Conservative journalist. I assume that she was a member of the Tory party, and she reported David Green, Damien Green, who was Theresa May's close ally and I think Deputy Prime Minister.
Who you might remember got sacked because he was watching copious amounts of porn while at work.
Right, okay, so I'm not sure if that is definitely true, but yeah, anyway.
Sure.
He certainly admitted to it being on his computers in 2008, which I think is what he went for. But on the way there, in terms of upping the pressure on him, she said that, I think quite recently, I can't remember when she said, maybe it was as recent as 2015, I think she said that he had met up with her once, and then when he saw a picture of her in the paper looking nice, he sent her a text message saying, offers are open for you to work with me. At some point when they met, I think on the surface it's not a big deal. I think he touched her leg or something like that.
He said he could advance her career if they had an affair.
Okay, so it's 3 or 4 things at the same time. I could advance your career.
A few things.
My wife is very understanding. And so just a few little things. And so anyway, she is a Conservative journalist, and it's not really in her interests to make any noise about this, but with the fallout from Weinstein and Me Too, I think she thought it would be more important for her to make a statement. So she did, and they went for it. The Daily Mail wrote a hit piece on her called One Very Pushy Lady, and pictures of her taking a selfie of herself. And I think they were really condemning her for wanting to have a career in journalism and daring to criticise this government.
Which becomes a problem when you so how dare you want to become a journalist by criticising the government? It's an interesting situation. How dare you criticise the government as a journalist? Yeah, and it's an interesting story because you raise it as a Conservative woman who's come out with this story, been quite brave, and then been viciously attacked. Well, you know, had a hit piece on her for being brave. And wasn't it you who was telling me that we don't seem to have had the same impact of the Me Too movement happening in the UK?
Oh, I was talking to Charlotte from News Peaks, who told me, and this wasn't in our script today, but she told me that why was there no Me Too here in this country in the same way as in the US? And she said that the top 100, she's also, I think, a director of or trustee of the Independent Film Trust. So the whole question of independent films, she said the top 100 films in the world, about 80 of them were American, 20 were British, which is more than most other countries. And then she asked me how many female directors I thought there were. And she said there were 2. And if you were going to conduct an audit on other factors, for example, race or class, then numbers might be even worse.
Yeah.
But she said, why was there no Me Too here? Because the film industry, which is quite big here, is just a feeder for Hollywood. And there is no independent film. And in fact, it's just surrounded by predatory capitalists who want to take your money off you in order for you to live your dream, which you will not break even. But it's probably quite good for tax avoidance schemes.
I've heard, actually. But yeah, coming back to the Kate Mulvey story.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
She won a settlement of, I think it was £11,000, wasn't it, from the Daily Mail?
Interesting, yeah. They didn't admit fault. So they've given her 11 grand, but they haven't admitted fault. And I think they even somewhere else said that it was a gesture of goodwill on their part. Oh, my God. So we've attempted to massacre your reputation.
Yeah.
You've gotten away with, you haven't killed yourself. You're still working. So it looks like that's failed for us. But, and the other interesting thing is, of course, the Daily Mail's ideal reader is the 40-year-old conservative woman. I think that is their dream demographic, and they've done a hit piece on the kind of woman who's decided to have a career in journalism and talk about what she faces in the workplace. So this is whistleblowing. It's institutional misogyny.
And it's press freedom, because we've just had, as we talked about before, this outpouring of the media when that vote was coming on Leveson 2, that we've learned our lessons, we're taking on the powerful. And here, in the midst of Me Too, you have the Daily Mail going after.
Okay, so just to unpack
Kate
what you were
Mulvey.
saying. Yeah, Leveson 2, I mean, I've probably followed it a little bit more than most people, but I'm not going to pretend to really know what's going on. So I understand there was a clause in the data protection bill, and it was part of that. And Ed Miliband was saying we need to have Leveson 2, and they managed to kill it off. But in the editorial columns of the Mail and the Sun, they kept on saying it's all about freedom of the press freedom. And I came to the conclusion that they're talking about freedom for billionaires to be able to print what they want, do a hit piece on anyone who calls out them or their helpers, such as Damien Green, and anybody else. Well, you're in trouble if you want to be in another position. So, for example, Matt Hancock, I didn't watch it, but last Sunday he was on the Marr show, and he received plaudits for basically saying, I'm going to come down tough on social media. Now, I remember interviewing John McDonnell a year and a half ago, and he said, I think we should have a Google tax in order to fund independent media.
Yeah.
It's quite funny, actually, because Google fund the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, who have now got this Bureau Local thing. So that is a good thing that the Google are doing, in my opinion. But when Hancock said, right, we have to do this, it's all just posturing. Yeah. And afterwards, apparently someone asked him about it, and he said, yeah, it might take 2 years. So it's just quite interesting. They're probably, I'm sure George Osborne had Sheryl Sandberg, Eric Schmidt, all these other people on their various business roundtables, helping them avoid tax.
Well, we should point people to the Claire Bourne interview, because we talked to her about what she felt about the recent hearings and Mark Zuckerberg. And she said, they're not asking the questions that I would like to have asked, which are the governance of Facebook. How do you let Mark Zuckerberg be CEO and owner?
Chairman.
And
that's a big no-no. The chairman is supposed to have his eye on, or her eye on, the CEO.
Exactly. Yeah, right. And Sheryl Sandberg is Chief Operating Officer.
Daily.
Where is she? What's she saying?
Daily running the show. She actually, exactly. Great points from Claire Bourne. Obviously, I wish more people watched that video. I remember Sandberg did a little Washington tour months before Cambridge Analytica. And, what's his name? Zuckerberg went round every single state in America shaking people's hands, and people said he was going to run for president. The entire press freedom issue that, as we have said, is we're talking about this as a result of the Kate Mulvey thing. She's a journalist, and in her statement she said, the people that we have heard from in relation to Me Too, you've only heard from them because they've got the means to pay for a lawyer, and they've got the media platform for anyone to care about it once they've started paying for a lawyer. If anyone else does it, you won't hear it. So I'm going to be giving the money, I don't know if it was half the money or all the money, to the Me Too fund. I think it's Time's Up. Yeah. And the UK version of Time's Up is called the Justice and Equality Fund. And she said, the money that I give to them, it will be distributed to people who don't have my advantages.
Yeah, her words were, the fund would particularly focus on those less privileged, working class women, women of colour, and those with other intersecting disadvantages who were less able to face the brunt of harassment in the workplace. And she said, it's not enough for prominent white women to speak out against harassment from our relative safety. It is essential that we give tangible financial support to women who take greater financial risks in challenging power. That's pretty strong words.
I really was very surprised to see somebody that's been coming at it from where she has say something like that. And yeah, I just thought it was worth highlighting. So I looked at it, and then I noticed also that the Guardian article in the paper doesn't have any of those quotes in it. It's only when you go onto the internet that you see those quotes. So obviously they had space issues, and that bit got cut. So yeah, it's just interesting to see sexism whistleblower, because she is a whistleblower really, because she's a freelance and she's talking about the inside of politics and things like that. There's a story at the moment about how John Burkhoff is got done for calling Andrea Leadsom a stupid woman or something like that. I can't remember. Obviously, he's not the only person who probably thinks that she is, but I'm not sure where I stand on all of that. I mean, you know, if I haven't, I don't remember ever calling you a stupid woman. But if I had
know about it, mate.
Well, if we had an argument, you know, I don't know. Anyway, I'm not going to go there.
Well, just while we've mentioned Facebook, we should mention that the obviously General Data Protection Regulation has come in this
GDPR.
Today, it's the 25th of May. So,
right, GDPR, right.
So all those wonderful emails you've probably been getting in your inbox asking you to continue to sign up. And yeah, do check out that Clearborn interview. I've seen Mark Zuckerberg, he faced EU Parliament this week. And
in Brussels, and it was live streamed, wasn't it?
It was live streamed. He didn't want it to be shown. He wanted it to be a private meeting. And the EU said, no, we want to live stream it. Interesting that he would like some privacy. And one point that Clearborn brought up was that they keep saying that they're just a platform, but they're actually monopolizing media. They're a media company, and Zuckerberg is clearly trying to still distance himself from that kind of categorization.
Yeah, she was so on it. I mean, the way she said the biggest trick they ever played was convincing everyone that they were tech. You know, yes, he's a computer programmer, but he's a computer programmer for a media company.
Absolutely.
And that was very clever. There's also a case going on that says that in 2012, as early as 2012, Zuckerberg himself took charge of the project in which the technology was developed that allows Facebook to know everything about all your friends.
Yeah.
Whistleblower type stuff.
And also, yeah, so that he was involved in the scheme whereby the technology to use your data for things like, you know, the Cambridge Analytica scandal will come out of these kinds of techniques in terms of taking your data and making decisions about you. But I think I was speaking to someone yesterday who is interested in kind of psychometrics, deep state and military. And obviously there's this background that's not really been touched on enough, I think, in terms of where this profiling comes from. The Cambridge Analytica story is, and this is something that Clearborn said again, is it's being seen as a blip on the radar. But
by who? The players?
By Facebook is trying to suggest, you know, there's this horrible thing that came into our platform that was, a good thing. You know, we're the good guys, and this is the nefarious app that came in and did the bad things. Yeah,
from my perspective, I think it's being also used as an excuse for them to be able to say, okay, so now we all know that we do facial recognition, so can you just tick that box? Yeah. That's what I had this week. Basically, can you tick that box for facial recognition now? Because we all know it's good for you.
Yeah. But this is Cambridge Analytica is a microcosm of what the system is doing all the time. Right, this is the world that we are entering into, where people are able to hold this data and make these decisions about you. This is the model, right? And yeah, there was. I think Mark Zuckerberg said most people have opted in to targeted advertising, but they don't have a choice because otherwise you'd have to leave Facebook, right? So he's like, oh, everybody's opted in, so they clearly wanted targeted advertising.
It's a bit like in terms of so if we're talking about the politics of information, info politics, then it's also a little bit like with whistleblowing, where you sign something when you start a job and you see something that's blatantly criminal and you're not allowed to talk about it. And they just say, well, you signed that. And I guess the EU Trade Secrets Act, which is basically just a corporate secrecy rule, is saying that. Interesting that in the US also this week, I just thought I'd throw this one in, I heard that there was a Supreme Court hearing that said that up to 25 million Americans in work are going to be affected by this new judgment that says that when you signed a contract at work, you can do a class action if you see bad stuff happening at work, and now you can't. Now you would have to do arbitration. So class action is when you and other victims get together, and so the legal costs go down, and you've set a sort of precedent when you win. And now it's arbitration, which I think means that it's one-on-one, massive resources of the corporation versus you as an individual, where you don't know your interests, you don't know it's just the whole principle of collective bargaining and everything like that, and economies of scale is basically gone. So they'd be fracturing you. And so it's that, they just sort of dismantle everything.
It's interesting as well, because when I've had experience of the banking victims in the UK, when you have
this is when you were researching the SME victims of people like HBOS and RBS.
Yeah. I found that when they made their complaints, they were, you just feel like one person who's making a complaint, and it wasn't revealed to them that actually thousands of people were making similar complaints. So how much are you able to pick off individuals and say, oh, you're a blip. Yeah, you're the exception, rather than this is happening.
I love this theme that you're coming out with the blip here, because I think Gillian Tett wrote a book, FT correspondent, she wrote a book called The Silo Effect. And so this fragmentation, it means that people that work for the same organization often don't know what the other people are doing. Right. I've seen that in effect. And so then afterwards they can walk around being innocent, just saying, oh, I don't agree with that. My colleague does it, and it helps my share price and my pension plan. But it's possibly another micro version of strategic ignorance. I can't know everything. In fact, there's a lot of things I don't want to know.
Yeah.
We're going to come on to that in a minute as well. So we're still officially on Kate Maltby, and we're talking about the issues underneath this hearing. So she could afford to go to court, but she said she's going to donate her money to people who can't, so that power can be spoken to by people who have to take bigger financial risk than she does when they're speaking out. And then it makes me think of the Daily Mail, who cleans their buildings. The cleaners won a living wage, a real living wage of £10 or something like that, didn't they?
They were all migrants,
right?
Cleaners of the Daily Mail. And I think perhaps that might have helped the campaign be pushed along a bit further, because just saying the Daily Mail employs all migrant cleaners, not even on a living wage, considering their output, I think it just caught on in a lot of people's minds. And so the campaign, just knowing that as a fact, travelled quite far. So I don't know if that helped them along in terms of achieving their aims quicker.
Yeah, good point. And then parallel with that, brothers in arms of the Daily Mail are obviously the Taxpayers Alliance, the Institute of Economic Affairs, Spectator, and why not say it, Tommy Robinson, Kate Hopkins, all of this lot, far-right, Nazis.
Absolutely, yes.
And obviously you'd have different components. You'd have the neoliberal component, and then you have the anti-globalization component. But there's still this underlying kind of, are we talking about white power here? Is this what we're talking about, Ku Klux Klan? Now, they might not want to be associated with that in every single way, but that's how it looks. I saw tweets going out this week about the fact that lots of them have the same address.
Yes, this is Tufton Street, isn't it?
55 Tufton Street.
55 to 57.
Okay, so that's the kind of official address of a few different organisations.
Yeah, so we've got the Taxpayers Alliance, who you might have seen a little bit more on TV regularly. Chloe Wesley was on BBC QT. They've been around for a while. Hardcore Tory pressure group. They really push the workfare programme. Also at 55 to 57 Tufton Street is the Global Warming Policy Foundation, which is Nigel Lawson's climate change denial outfit. And we also have Leave Means Leave, dedicated to the hardest Brexit possible. And Civitas, Spectator's Toby Young. This is his classic liberal free school promoting gang. And I've got that from John Spears on Twitter.
So much to unpack there. I mean, especially the difference between classic liberal and liberal. We won't go there for now. When you say work programme as well, the work programme, we're going to be coming onto that in a minute when we talk about David Gawker, who used to be in charge of the Department of Work and Pensions temporarily and is now the Justice Minister, and his comments on prisoners. But going back to these people, Chloe Wesley, for example, who's been on lots of different television programs and obviously was a big Brexiteer. Strategic ignorance. So you've got facts, and you've got facts that serve their purpose. And in the little bit of reading about the rules of rhetoric that I've done in the last few days, it basically says you only include the arguments that are actually the facts that are going to help you. Everything else, it's not a convenient fact. So again, it's strategic ignorance.
Sure.
I will concentrate on the syntax, let the semantics follow. People will understand what I'm saying because I know how to order my words properly.
Yeah.
But, if there's lots of truth that gets excluded, it doesn't matter. So all of these people are in the same building.
Isn't that interesting?
It's almost like as if some kind of a Latin American based billionaire such as Michael Ashcroft set up Conservative Home, paid for, what's her name, Isabel Oakeshott, to write a book called Call Me Dave, in which David Cameron was said to have performed fellatio on a pig or the other way round, managed to get the Brexit vote going on, and then afterwards achieve a coup d'etat. Well,
It's interesting. It certainly needs. I think DSmog have actually done a good piece on Tufton Street last year, so do check that out if you get a chance.
speaking of basically of pure evil, I met Liam Fox on Saturday.
Really?
Yeah.
Where did you meet Liam Fox?
Well, he was unaccompanied, Paddington Station.
Dr. Liam Fox.
Yeah, I was with a friend. We were talking, and in fact, we were actually talking about the temptation of evil and whether or not we should just be evil.
Just happened to be discussing that.
Yeah, because we're both just trying to make a name for ourselves and, looking for big boy status, that kind of thing. And
It up pops Liam Fox.
yeah, I mean, he's a journalist as well. And I say journalist, I mean, none of us are really making any money on that front. But there he was. So, of course, I went up to him.
Of course.
My friend, because I couldn't see him, my friend says, I think that's Liam Fox. And he was unaccompanied, not quite as tubby as he looks on telly. So I go up to him. My phone's not working, nor was my mate's. So what did I say? First of all, do Alec rule the world? And because obviously he's been schooled in the art of strategic ignorance, he just carries on trundling up the hill, Paddington.
That's American Legislative Exchange Council, by the way, who Fox's think tank was twinned with.
Yeah, exactly. And domiciled at at the House of Commons, and Atlantic Bridge and all this stuff. So I basically said, I then spelled it out for him. I said, the American Legislative Exchange Council, do they run the world? He carries on walking. He hasn't stopped listening, but he's carrying on walking. So I said, Runjan, by the way. And then I said, oh, by the way, what's going on with you in the Sri Lankan government? Because you genocided my people, didn't you? He was a foreign office minister in 1996, and I think he continued the relationship, and his mate Adam Verity was on a junket, and everyone thought that Verity was a defence minister and all of this kind of stuff. I mean, he got sacked for it, and look, he's back. He came out with a fantastic answer. He basically just said, our policy there is the same as it is with everywhere else, which isn't a morally great answer, but quite a good parry from Fox.
It's an answer, yeah.
Yeah, so I said, look, we're highly critical of all your policies. Can we have an interview? And I mean, this is terrible, isn't it? I'm not sure if I can live with myself for this, because there was a time in 2011 where I remember actually feeling rather strongly about the whole Fox thing, because, he kept on clinging on to power and everyone knew what he had done. By the way, I'm sure he was very much behind the Libya thing. He was defence minister then. And he
Just remind people of what he did do.
Well, I think you had Obama, Sarkozy and Cameron, and Sarkozy quite clearly didn't want to do the Libya thing. So he said, I'm not doing it. And Sarkozy had been in not that long, I think 2 or 3 years, and Cameron much less than a year. And so Fox is in the background, defence minister, so I think he just cooed it up and just said, let's do this. So they went in and they did it, which was obviously absolutely disastrous in so many ways.
Of course.
Stock market has gone up a lot since then, though. And if that's the kind of thing you're interested in, then you got some decent returns. And they got a Brexit out of it from all of the migration crisis and all these other things.
Which is up Liam Fox's street, isn't it?
Yeah, so he's the biggest causer of migration.
Wow.
One of them anyway. But what was interesting was that he did have a conversation with me, not a very long one, and he said, contact the Department of International Trade, and I don't have a card on me, but he didn't say, let's see if we can line that up. He might be a liar, but that's still a bit too far for him. But, he said, yeah. So interesting. I mean, that was kind of me meeting someone who has killed many, many, many Sri Lankan Tamils by his actions. But I don't feel I can blame him for everything, because he's not the one squeezing the trigger. There's a lot of other stuff involved which I don't get involved in.
Yeah.
I remember saying to my dad once, years ago, Appa, are you happy that I don't speak Tamil and that I'm not particularly integrated in the Sri Lankan community? And he looked at me and he said, son, I know you. If you were, I know what you'd be doing. So I thought, oh, great. My dad just basically said I would be financing terrorism if I had more connections. So fair enough. All right, let's move on from Kate Maltby.
Yes.
I don't know if it's genetic. Anyway, who's next? David Gorka. Okay, we've done a lot more time on Maltby than I planned, but we've covered a few other bases.
We have.
Gorka, we've got Gorka and we've got Italy. So just quickly touch on Italy. So Italy, 5-star, and the Northern League. So the Northern League are fascist, and the 5-star created by a clown and populist. Quite clever, but there they are. They've got quite a few cities, like Rome and Florence and a few other cities in Italy. But the deep significance as far as international markets is concerned is that 5-star said basic income and the League said deportation. International banks don't really care about the deportation thing, but they do care about basic income because there's a lot of Italian debt that's floating around that people are holding and they're being paid out on, and they're worried. I think the idea is, I listened to an FT podcast earlier on, and they said if you're a fund manager in Boston, the types of noise about the basic income and how that's going to affect the Italian budget, that's not what you want to hear.
Right. It's bad for them.
Yeah, you've been reading Confessions of an Economic Hitman.
I have. Yes.
Is this related in some way? And if so, please shine a light.
How do you mean?
Well, just if you're a fund manager in Boston and you hear that Italy is going to do basic income, for me, this is what politics is about.
Sure. Well, yeah, I would definitely recommend reading Confessions of an Economic Hitman. I guess the story is just really revealing in the ways that the system is pushed through in terms of US interests and corporate interests. So the ways that people in the US are interested in every geostrategic place in the world. And, you know, this includes Iran, who have clearly been in the news recently, who have now... Who did they dub a terrorist organization because they wanted to come off the dollar? And this is just like a continuation of the US dominance. And so, yeah, I'm not surprised that America is the one who... People in America are the ones who are raising their eyebrows about what's going on.
Okay, thank you.
This is a change to the system.
Yeah, nice. I haven't read it, but as I said, I think, you know, these are these connections that are really helpful. So I was talking about the basic income factor, not the deportation, and the fact that a fund manager in Boston doesn't want to hear basic income coming out of Italy. Now, we are friends with David Graeber, who's got a new book out called Bullshit Jobs. We interviewed him last year. We've done some work on basic income, and we've got some things coming out soon. Cap?
Yeah, we did an interview recently with Sarath Davla, who has been involved in India's basic income trials. It's a really, really great interview. I just went over it the other day. That's going to be coming out soon. We'll also be interviewing Barbara Jacobson, who's involved with basic income in the UK. And yeah, just opening up that conversation. Incredible results of what's happened in India. And one of the big points that I really appreciated that Sarath made was about this welfare paradigm that is affecting the world, which is that we are worker-centric. And the idea of welfare is to deal with the exceptions to that, but we're increasingly moving to a world of more precarious work, and we should become citizen-centric because everybody's chasing GDP, everybody's chasing growth, and the results of that are producing perverse things. So in India, there's been a spate of farmer suicides, incredibly tragic, because small and marginal farmers, he said, are struggling to make the money that they were able to make before. And when those problems happen, the government's answer is to just waiver the loans. Now, instead of doing that, why not just give everyone the basic subsistence and the security that they need to live?
So the government's wavering on the loans. Right, that explains to me a lot of the stories I've seen, which isn't really that many because I don't read about this that much, but about non-performing loans in India. So if you're a bank and you loan and you lend money and then afterwards it doesn't come back, that's called a non-performing loan or a bad loan. And if it's never going to come back, you've got a problem. You've got a black hole in your balance sheet. And people said in India, one of the problems they have is all the non-performing loans they've got. And so it's basically people are in unsustainable situations. I remember 15 or 20 years ago seeing Vandana Shiva talk about people committing suicide. And she then said, we're mainly Hindu in India. When a Hindu commits suicide, we actually believe we're coming back. So it's a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't remember. Yeah, I've lost my point there. But
Oh yeah, well,
look out for that. Look out for those interviews. They'll be very, very good. You were going to say something about Barbara and the dangers of losing the basic income argument to the right.
Oh yeah, that's it. So Barbara said, she told me, well, look, if the left-wing parties don't start talking about basic income more and more, then eventually it will just be the National Front that do it. So in France, it'll be the National Front. So right now, the League are against the basic income, and the Five Star are for it. But if they go in coalition, they're going to have to deliver. So either way, that coalition will deliver basic income, or will try. So that's interesting. Another thing that's been happening in conversations with Barbara is that I send her stories that I see from the Daily Mail, because obviously she's not interested in reading that, where they big up Ian Duncan Smith and they talk about the numbers and they talk about how many people are in work. So they're always doing, Hugo Duncan, I think, is the guy who does it there, always doing these stories about what a great economy the UK economy is and how many people are in work. But what Barbara told me was that most of this work is temporary. It's part-time, and people can't go above a certain amount of hours because then they'll hit the benefit cap.
Yeah.
So actually, all of these people, it's more like before the Industrial Revolution, you didn't have unemployment, you had underemployment. And yeah, so this is what we're moving towards.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a total fudge. You know, you'll hear the Conservatives saying employment is at its highest ever, but of course you've unleashed the kind of precariat, the 0-hour contracts into that world. And also we have record levels of in-work poverty. So yes, there are more people in work than ever, but there are more people in work than ever who are still unable to get by. And does that mean that it's a successful system? And coming back to the Confessions of an Economic Hitman, you know, in that story, you really understand how he was used as an economist to dream up these figures of GDP and growth and how they really don't mean that much. And it's all designed to get us to chase this system that isn't really working for us. So, you know, basic income comes into conflict with that.
Yeah, sure. And in terms of the history of the marketing of the word growth, apparently it was Samuel Britton that came up with this idea of growth is good. And John F. Kennedy's economists, I think this is Ann Pettifor that I heard this from and a couple of other authors, and they basically just said it. They knew it was just a temporary thing and it's become a permanent thing, permanent growth. On Sarath, talking about going from a worker-centric
to citizen-centric. And just to add one thing that he said, he said the radical part of it, there's nothing really radical about it. The radical part of it is that it is unconditional. And he says you don't have to prove that you're poor, and it opens up all of these questions about what is work, who does unpaid work, what is care, you know, what does it mean to get by, what do we do with it, what is money, what are resources. So yeah, it's really, really powerful interview, and he gives you the results of what happened in India, which had some really positive outcomes.
Yeah, interesting that he talks about opening these things up. Well, there's no point in opening things up if you're not allowed to talk about them once you've opened them up. So the other thing is you open them up and then afterwards you say, who are we? Where do we stand? What kind of commitments are we prepared to make to each other? As well as, you know, whatever else. Because there was that lawyer, wasn't there, in America who was chased around for having said in the cafe, what was his name? I've forgotten his name. Schlossberg.
Oh yeah, you don't speak English.
Yeah, and he eventually apologized, but oh my God. And people were saying, oh, should you hound him and everything like that? And I just thought, well, I'm not sure. But the point is, he's put his hand up and he said, I'd quite like to carry on living in America, please. You know, I'm really sorry and stuff like that. But that's an example for me.
I was happy with his hounding.
Right, yeah. Well, that's an example for me of somebody, you know, if Sarath says, look, let's open it up so we can talk about stuff. That's somebody who's there saying, no, you can't talk about stuff. I can talk about stuff, but you can't.
Yeah.
And this freedom of the press, actually, if it is freedom for billionaires, then Sarath says we're going from a worker-centric discussion and we should have a citizen-centric discussion. But in actual fact, unfortunately, we're being told that we have a worker-centric discussion. I don't remember a Marxist press apart from Morning Star. I think what we're talking about here is a billionaire-centric conversation, or to pimp a new book that's coming out, a CEO society. So essentially this deification of the CEO, the rock star CEO, that's it, of basically saying, oh, it's a CEO said it, so it's amazing, right. As if they're better people. So this is back to our old Hindu hierarchical pyramidical structure of society, which is where, you know, the Brahmins are allowed to read and no one else is.
And again, this Clea Bourne does mention this in the interview, the mythologies that we have about these new tech entrepreneurs being these guys who
T-shirts.
really, t-shirts and shorts, and I think she said they look so cool because they make it look effortless to be this billionaire. So they're even cooler than
I'm just a decision maker.
Yeah,
I know about decision making. My dad didn't help me. I know about decision making.
You might have known a hedge fund.
Yeah. And so, of course, Martin Sorrell, who until recently was the head of WPP, this is, again, part of the strategic ignorance argument. He was in charge of WPP for 33 years. So he's a Davos guy. And this was an example of what used to be called cardigan capitalism. So now it's T-shirts, with Zuckerberg and everybody else. But it used to be cardigan capitalism, where people broke out of their suits and people like Richard Branson wore a cardigan at Davos and said, listen, everybody just lighten up, learn about meditation and happiness, that sort of thing, almost.
Right, yeah.
And Martin Sorrell was the ultimate kind of cardigan capitalist on that front. And nobody knows why he lost his job. He was in charge of WPP for 33 years, gave himself a £70 million bonus last year.
Nice.
Yeah, and apparently even he doesn't know. Apparently they asked him, you've been naughty. Can we tell you what you've been doing? And I think he basically just said, no, don't tell me. And so the shareholders are saying, we would like to know because we trusted this company, and they're being told for data protection reasons, you can't know. So the guy who, in charge of their company,
Really?
they're not allowed to know. No. And HSBC have just moved. This relates to Clear's talk as well, because she was talking about how the different banking departments and products have these relationships with financial journalists. Well, HSBC have moved their business away from WPP, one of the world's biggest advertising firms, to someone else, probably to his new outfit, which would indicate to me that they don't care about the advertising. What they care about is what he can sort out for them. His address book. Who do you know? Yeah. All right. Moving on. We are seriously running out of time here. Gawker. So David Gawker, he was Treasury for ages. You can just see that he's almost like Michael Gove. You wheel him out when things are really difficult. He's a man who's just got no regard for other journalists. It's okay if they're on his side, like Andrew Neil, of course. Yeah. But, they can make it look like an argument, but he can just nail it. So he's now the Justice Minister. I understand that means that he is the boss of Jeremy Wright, who is the Attorney General. And Jeremy Wright chooses the next head of the Serious Fraud Office. I had a conversation with Sue Hawley of Corruption Watch about this. So far, nobody being appointed the head of the Serious Fraud Office.
They still haven't announced it properly, have they?
No, apparently people saw who was interviewed and could tell who was told that they didn't get the job. And so from that have been able to work out by a process of elimination that it must be her. But for some reason, this announcement isn't being made. Now, as I said...
Lisa Osofsky.
Yeah, Wright reports to Gawker. And Gawker, his background is he's a solicitor in the financial services. I think he's got family very high up in legal publishing as well. So we're talking Illuminati here, basically. And he was at the Treasury, temporarily DWP, so in charge of unemployment, benefits, sickness.
Came in to sing the praises of a completely broken universal credit system.
Right,
He did that.
And so now that he's in charge of justice, he's in charge of prisons. And so I remember when Gove took over prisons, I said, are you going to allow prisoners to read now? And he did, which is very kind of him. Must be his education ministry background speaking there. And this time Gawker, he's got his background. So he's basically said, I'm going to sort it out so that prisoners can have leave to get experience in work, like sort of work experience. It sounds like the work program. I don't know if they're going to be paid. And then he said, and the other really good thing about this is that with Brexit, there are so many jobs that we're never going to be able to get done because we're not going to allow anyone into the country. So we can get prisoners to do that. And I thought, that's exactly the same as that film, The 13th Amendment, or The 13th, or 13. It is,
yeah.
Where they basically just get people to make stuff in prison.
In the prisons, yeah.
Yeah, for very, very cheap. So that, for me, was a bullshit jobs kind of story. It was a basic income story. But also, it's related to Corruption Watch as well, because if it's his job to choose the next head of the Serious Fraud Office, and he doesn't seem to get that if you're coming out of prison, you might only be in prison because you were poor. You might only be in prison because you didn't have an income to be able to pay for food.
Absolutely.
I met someone not that long ago who told me that when he was much younger, he was involved in a scam, went to jail, and that most of the people that he saw in jail just wanted to buy some toys for their kids, you know, and Gorka is too busy mixing with corporate criminals, I think, and trying to work out a way of being able to say Britain is open for business and that sort of thing, than he is to understand what's going on with why people end up in jail in the first place. And he seems to think that we can get them out of jail and then afterwards we'll give them a job, a crap job, give them a bullshit job, and everything's fine. I've done my job properly.
This is also the dedication of this government to the race to the bottom. So the workfare scheme, we mentioned earlier, this was the brainchild of the Taxpayers Alliance, who got the Conservative Party to adopt it.
I didn't know that.
I remember their report coming out and then pushing that this would be the thing that would help.
So it's all coming out of Ashcroft then, isn't it? The billionaire.
There you go. And as I said before, the research all said this will drive down wages. It will only benefit these corporations like Tesco's, who employ people for 6 weeks at a time to stack shelves. And you're just ensuring that layer is there after Brexit. So, I mean, on Question Time last night, somebody said, you know, this was a country running on cheap labour. We wanted at the end of that, and that's why we voted Brexit, to bring a halt to immigration. But really, that's not going to be something that goes away. And of course, unfortunately, for people who think that way, there's going to be other trade deals with places like India who are going to demand free movement. So
Japan did this week as well. They said we want more visas.
Yeah. And who's going to do those jobs? You're still going to require cheap. Like, the government is more committed to the cheap labour for business than it is to the public having better, you know, working rights. And this is something that's been said for a long time. I mean, Priti Patel said, I can't remember her exact words in Parliament, but she said she wanted to lift the burden of 30% of employment and safety regulations, and that means losing workers' rights.
Okay, I'm sure that means Grenfell as well. Okay, so that's a bit of time on Gorka. Thank you, that was really good. Let me just run through a few things, and if you've got any good points, which I know you do, then we can hopefully help hit
fit
them.
in what we can, yeah.
Yeah, so on the subject of think tanks, Mark Littlewood, what did he say? He was talking about something. Who is he and what did he say?
So he's the director of the Institute for Economic Affairs, one of the dark money think tanks of the UK. Probably the most prominent, I would say, the most listened to.
Been around for 60 years.
And he had a comment in the Daily Mail saying that the councils should deal with high pay rather than hiking council tax rates. Now, I thought that was a bit weird coming from...
High pay, so you mean the bosses?
Yeah.
So the bosses of the councils are being paid too much. And I think that's true. But yeah.
Sure. Why not?
But what was he saying?
But, he came out and says that should be tackled before council tax hikes. Now, I remember quite clearly the Institute for Economic Affairs coming out every January when the High Pay Centre does their campaign for fat cat CEOs and says that by, the 7th or the 8th of January, they have already achieved the wages, the top CEOs have already achieved the wages of their staff, the average wage in the UK, which is about £25,000. And I've seen the IEA release press releases saying these campaigns are really no help at all, and you shouldn't be focusing on the high pay of CEOs to deal with inequality. We should be dealing with how to help the poorest rather than paying any attention at all to the people at the top. So I thought it was an interesting comment from Mark Littlewood, considering his institution normally strikes out against that sort of thing.
Right, yeah. He says, leave the people at the top out of this.
Yeah.
Interesting. Andrew Adonis, I remember him sending a tweet out, so Lord Adonis, anti-Brexit, but also done a lot to make the university an illiberal space. I remember him saying to the striking lecturers earlier on this year, you should be focusing on the pay of vice-chancellors instead of, your own pay or something like that, or the high fees and things like that. Yeah, so this kind of theme in terms of they sell one idea and then do another one.
And you were just saying last week, I mean, we might go on to Shell now, but that they focus on the executive pay rather than the environmental destruction as the problem with these oil companies and these fossil fuel companies.
Absolutely, yeah. So it was Shell and BP AGM. I haven't got too much information on the BP AGM. I know people came in from around the world for it. And,
they did.
And things like that, talking about fracking in New Mexico and things like that. But the Shell, I remember seeing in the papers, they said that the shareholders of Shell said, we think the managers are paying themselves too much, but 94% of them backed them on the climate, which is take no responsibility for what you've been doing, which is basically just saying it's kind of like a mass suicide pact. It's kind of ISIS. It's kind of Al-Qaeda. Just, let's just, hit walls.
Yeah.
Quite amazing.
You should just be paid a bit less.
Yeah, and so I've heard about a couple of companies who are called shareholder advisory companies. I think one's called Glass Lewis and another one is called ISS. I mean, these guys need a campaign against them because they're basically saying, oh yeah, we look after the interest of the shareholders, but when it comes to society, I don't think they care. And, unlike Share Action, who at least do a little something. So, yeah, we were talking about AGMs a little bit. Tamsin Cave, spoke to her to let her know that I've been speaking to Mary Inman last week, who is a whistleblower lawyer in the UK from the US. And I was reading up on some of her cases, and one of them is to do with United Health, the US health insurance firm that seemed to be taking over the NHS. And I'm sure the IEA, who don't say where they get their money from, I'm sure they get a lot of it from the US health insurance business, on top of tobacco. Tamsin told me that she's involved in a new project which is about investigating the links between property developers and councils, which I thought was interesting, and I said I would mention it today. Funnily enough, earlier on that day, I bumped into Robin Smith on Berwick Street in Soho. He runs Soho Dairy, and he's been basically running the campaign to keep that street operating. All of the independent stalls and everything. Loads of the independent shops in Soho have closed down. Loads of the stalls. That street where you used to be able to get fruit and other things, it just looks like a bomb's hit it. It's been construction works for 5 years. Interserve had the project over the road from him.
Right.
And they've been bailed out, basically. They are like Carillion. And basically he said that the SMEs really feel the squeeze right now. I mean, he even said that with Brexit, he's got someone working for him from Taiwan, and now he can't afford to pay her because he used to pay her 30 or 40 or something like that. And now the limit is he would have to pay her 65 to get her into the country, because the global market for talent is such that people are unlikely to come to the UK. They've got more options elsewhere. And so if you come from that country, then Britain says you need to pay them this much money, and he can't afford it. So he's been taken out of the game in various ways. Not to mention the link between property developers and Westminster Council, which is what we were talking about.
Yeah.
And he basically said that they've got a little vehicle, kind of the Westminster something forum, and that's where all of the donations go in. We've also got Haringey on the scene. Our friend Yanis has sent some FOIs about Haringey, and you were saying some things, shocking stuff.
Well, yeah, they've had the HDV deal, which was with Lendlease, who in Southwark had basically socially cleansed the Haygate estate. The council had actually paid out essentially for the evictions and this private company to come in and create luxury apartments.
So this is gentrification.
This is gentrification. And so they were going to sign the HDV, the Haringey Development Deal, the HDV, which was successfully beaten back by campaigners who faced lots of attacks in the media after that. But Claire Kober, who was on the council and was one of the pushers of the HDV, on the day of the local elections, she announced that she would be going over to the Pinnacle Group, which is a housing developer who were one of the unsuccessful bidders of the HDV deal, and also Alan Strickland, another councillor pushing the HDV deal. You know, these were the main pushers at Haringey Council, and he's also gone to the private sector.
So I live in Westminster, you live in Haringey, and just the two places that we are in, we've just mentioned. Now, Pinnacle are in both. And Pinnacle, I remember once somebody said to me, he was eavesdropping on a conversation I was having, and this is in a bookshop, and he just came up to me and he said, if you want a veritable concatenation of filth, I suggest you look at housing. So you could tell that he was a lawyer. And he basically said, it's all about Pinnacle.
Really?
And Unite did some research about 5 years ago into housing associations and that sort of thing. Not housing associations, ALMOs, arm's length management organisations, which was set up in order to stop the council from looking as though they were corruptly siphoning off all the money to themselves. And Pinnacle, apparently, in 2014 made £1 billion. And in 2014, they were taken over by a guy, I can't remember what his name was, but he's from Hong Kong. And the man in the shop told me that he was the biggest dealer of jewels in mainland China. And we're talking about finger in many pies. So I think they have a property company called Night Dragon. Night Dragon. And I think they've got a lot of the student complexes, a lot going on in Newham which I know a bit about because I sent FOIs about their debt that they have to Newham Council. And yeah, basically, this is the kind of scene that we're talking about. I sometimes worry about whether or not I should look at this stuff because I might end up, in a river. But Tamsin's going for it.
Yeah,
Let's do this. We'll crowdsource it.
It's a really, really important project. I mean, that example that I gave of Haringey, Claire Kober, when she left, she said she was leaving amidst bullying from groups who
Momentum.
Momentum.
Neo-fascists, according to our new Home Secretary.
According to Sajid Javid. But it was really just a community organising. We followed that story and we saw that they raised their money from local people. And we've got some of those interviews on Real Media if you want to check those out. But then this is how the story is contained in the media. So the campaigners get trashed. Claire Kober comes out and says she's being bullied. But is anybody going to talk about the fact she's now gone to a private company? Because all those fears that those campaigners had about how close these relationships are have come true. But will they ever have that said in the media? I don't think so.
Yeah, obviously we're going to have to start winding up now. But just before, I can't help but get my little last words in.
Go ahead.
Pinnacle, I think, may have had something to do with Andrew Adonis did this thing called the Infrastructure Commission. And so they backed fracking. Anna Minton showed that they backed fracking and they were saying, let's get rid of all the council blocks.
Yes, of course.
And she said it's a shame that more campaigners aren't onto this because then they'll see how connected it all is. Paul Watt told me that as far as he was, is it Paul Watt? That's his name? He's at Birkbeck, but he does a lot of stuff on housing.
Both those interviews on Real Media, by the way.
Yeah, he said to me that as far as he was concerned, Andrew Adonis was like the dark power behind New Labour and all of this kind of thing. So, yeah, because they basically had the Infrastructure Commission that he was on, that he's resigned from, but they were just pushing hardcore neoliberalism, anti-people politics up and down the country. Just to quickly mention a few other things before we go, there's been a US deregulation law that's come in for banking, so that's just going to be amazing for banking profits in the US. So another subprime coming, no doubt. There is also a law, did I mention the thing about arbitration and class action?
Yes, at the start.
Okay, there's that. Erectile dysfunction economy. So last week they were talking about the menopausal economy, and Francis O'Grady said, why don't we talk about the erectile dysfunction economy? If you think about it, it's far more relevant. I mean, there's so much testosterone in central banks. Maybe that's actually the issue Anyway.
I agree.
Funnily enough, Viagra is now available in pharmacies near you. And I do remember that. So it's 20 years since Pfizer came out with Viagra in the UK. And Peter Hitchens 2 weeks ago in his column, which is sometimes quite good, I'm talking about, he's now suddenly, pro-nationalisation of railways, and he says he always was, although I don't remember him saying that to me when I bumped into him the other day. He actually said the opposite. But when it comes to Viagra, he wrote this thing about feminism. He said, feminists, actually, they get whatever they want as soon as they want it. And so even in the 70s, any manual on feminism apparently had to be rewritten immediately because they would immediately get all of their demands, full stop. And then he says, that's the thing about the left. They've got everything they wanted as soon as they wanted it, which is why we're in such a mess. And I looked to the left because, his page falls on an odd number. I looked to the left and underneath it, and I saw an advertisement for Viagra. And I just couldn't help but think, he often says, I'm a journalist, I'm privileged enough to scribble on the back of adverts. Well, I wonder if that's a piece of sort of prime space opposite Peter Hitchens for your kind of, misogyny sort of space. Anyway, I just thought, keep taking the tablets. We do have other things to mention. Climate risk. I think somebody wrote a letter to the Bank of England saying we need to start thinking about climate risk. I think it's an awful man who wrote the thing, but still an important topic. And that's about it. There's a book called CEO Society that has been getting some kind of attention in The Guardian. It looks good. Bean Counters by Richard Brooks is coming out soon, and there's another book called The Big Four. So they called for closing down the Big Four, and now the fight back is starting where their PR armies, as Clearborn would, I'm sure, agree with, are basically finding ways to get into the newspapers to say, don't break up the Big Four.
Don't go too far.
Yeah, so these accounting firms, they need to stay in business according to these people. And loads of other things. What are we looking forward to next week?
Well, we will have the basic income interviews coming out soon. We'll be speaking to Barbara Jacobson. So look out for those. And I think we'll be doing a bit of a focus on workers' rights and some trade union stuff. So look out for that too.
Okay, one last thing. The Grenfell hearing has been going on, and we haven't talked about it today. We have been talking about regulation, of course, and the whole fallout from Carillion is what has led to all this attention on the Big Four, because they basically sign off on everything. If there's any kind of fraud, they're supposed to notice, but they keep signing off on it. Now, even the Times said we need more, we need real scrutiny at the Grenfell hearing. What are the social reasons as to why it happened? Now, I don't know if they're just doing that because they're looking for Tory votes or what, but it's a concern, and we'll try and keep our eyes on it and speak a bit more about what the implications of that are.
Absolutely.
All right, well, sorry, I think we may have overrun this week. Talk soon.
Bye.